Welcome back to the program. Diplomatic maneuvering in the Middle East extended as far as Ukraine this week, with Kyiv's foreign minister calling Turkey the epicenter of world diplomacy. But big carrots were dangled and then removed, as Putin didn't show up to meet Zelensky, instead sending a delegation known for laying out Russia's hardline maximalist position when it launched the full-scale 2022 invasion. According to experts, Putin also seems to be dissing the only leverage he has, a relationship with President Trump. I asked former Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba about where this crisis stands now. He joined me here in London. Welcome to the program.
It's good to be back.
You know a lot about these meetings. Describe what you think happened. I mean, was it ever serious that Putin was going to come?
No, absolutely. And he was actually clear. He never promised to come. He said he was ready to resume negotiations. And that kind of throws everything back to the spring of 2022, when Ukrainian and Russian delegations were seeing each other. But it didn't really have any impact on the course of the war. And I'm afraid that story will repeat itself again.
What do you think? I don't know whether you've seen the list of names of the Russian delegation, but they seem to be much lower level than people expected. No foreign minister, no chief of staff, obviously no Putin.
Well, you know, there are phony wars that we know from history, and now we have a case of phony diplomacy. You see, there is a symbolism in the delegation that President Putin sent to Istanbul this time, because the head of this delegation is exactly the same person who led the Russian delegation 3 years ago. And it did not deliver 3 years ago. I'm afraid it will not deliver now. So he just reinforces his message that he's willing to negotiate. But the question is, if you're willing to negotiate, why did you attack at all?
Okay, why did you attack? You could say, well, he thought he was going to get, you know, all of Ukraine famously, as everybody says, in 2 to 3 days. It obviously didn't happen. It's been more than 3
But he still believes in this.
No, come on.
No, he does. I assure you. It's just, for him, it's a matter, you know, the difference between him and President Zelensky and European leaders is that they are bound by electoral cycles, even if they are interrupted by the war. But Putin isn't. He has a long, you know, eternity ahead of him.
So what, he still eventually believes in getting Ukraine?
One way or another, absolutely.
So what can, for instance, a new administration seek to change in this dynamic? A new American administration?
Putin can put his plan on hold. I don't think he will ever be able to abandon the idea of subjugating Ukraine, because that's his whole mission. But there are very specific and clear instruments how to make him put his plans on hold, to delay them, and therefore buy time. First and foremost, it's oil. I mean, his war machine runs on oil, on money, on oil revenues. And this is the real needle that can make him change his mind. So
President Trump has, you know, on and off floated the idea of sanctions. Is that what you expect President Trump to do? He himself said nothing is going to change on the battlefield or around the negotiating table unless he meets with Putin.
In diplomacy, to make someone change his position, you have to strike the right balance between sticks and carrots, right? So the carrot here is when Donald Trump says, Vladimir, let's meet, let's see what we can do together. And the carrot, and the stick is, if you do not end the war, then this and this bad and that bad thing will happen to you. What we've seen so far were all the sticks were going to Ukraine and all the carrots were going to Russia. I mean, by definition, by the very kind of fundamentals of diplomacy, it doesn't work. Second thing to do is to continue supporting Ukraine militarily, because Putin's evaluation is that the West faltered. The West does not exist anymore. The United States walked away. The moment will come when Ukraine will begin to become weaker, and that will be his opportunity.
Can I ask you, though, you know, from President Biden's administration, you had pretty much a long-term commitment for diplomatic and military help. The slogan was, for as long as it takes. You remember that. There are some, including, you know, Ukrainian allies, who believe that at least President Trump and all those who kind of don't support sending endless weapons to Ukraine in the new administration, that at least they've brought matters to a head and kind of moved the conversation away from endless war towards figuring out how to stop it.
Well, the need to change attitude towards the strategy was apparent, it was obvious. President Trump brought new dynamics into this conversation, but as I said, in diplomacy, it's about sticks, carrots, and a sense of time. And you cannot achieve a result if you give all the sticks to Ukraine that was attacked and all the carrots to Putin. Because who attacked? Because he just doesn't.
Don't you think it's changing a little bit that President Trump is less, you know, sticking it to Ukraine?
It is changing a little bit, but I can tell you that in terms of reaching a ceasefire, today we are in exactly the same moment as we were 4 months ago in January, or 6 months ago, or even 8 months ago. Everything we've seen so far, let's be clear about it, these were not negotiations about ceasefire. These were maneuvers to keep President Trump on his side.
Putin's maneuvers.
And Zelensky's maneuvers as well. He was also maneuvering to avoid Trump's wrath and anger and moves which would put Ukraine into an even weaker position.
Is there a struggle in Europe, the idea of having to choose between giving their weapons and ammunition to Ukraine or having to fill the massive gap that the Trump administration has created for their own security? Do you think the Europeans have what it takes?
They certainly have the infrastructure, there's the money, and the potential to put all these pieces together and to seriously address the issue of Europe's defense, which Ukraine would also benefit from. The Europeans have to do a very simple math exercise. They have to call Kyiv, sit down with them, and do a very simple math. Here is the volume of weapons Ukraine is spending every month. Here is the volume of weapons Europe is currently delivering. And here is the volume of weapons that will have to be delivered to compensate the absence of American deliveries. Because the moment there is a gap between what Ukraine has and what Ukraine needs to fight, this is where you will see the situation changing, the situation on the front line.
And then just a short time ago, President Trump announced that he is planning to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin by phone on Monday. That followed earlier comments by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He is in Rome ahead of the Pope Leo's inaugural Mass tomorrow. Rubio says the Vatican could have an important role to play in creating peace in Ukraine.
We thank the Holy See for its willingness to be involved in this process. Obviously, there are a number of countries that have offered that as well, but we think it would be we'll talk about that, the status of the talks, the updates after yesterday, and the path forward. It certainly is a place that I would think that both sides would be comfortable coming. So we are grateful for their longstanding efforts, not simply on trying to broker peace, but on the exchanges of prisoners. There are children that have currently been taken from their homes that the Ukrainians would like to see returned, and the Holy See has been very involved in that regard. So we'll talk about that and all of it, and obviously always grateful for the willingness of the Vatican to play this constructive and positive role.
CNN's Vatican correspondent Christopher Lamb has more.
Well, the Vatican has long sought to play the role of peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine, and essentially the offer from Cardinal Pietro Parolin is that the Vatican could be neutral territory for talks to take place. Of course, there was an extraordinary moment just before the funeral of Pope Francis where President Zelensky and President Trump met in St. Peter's Basilica. Amazing images of that meeting, and apparently the talks were constructive. Pope Leo XIV said on Wednesday, while addressing Eastern Catholic Church leaders, that the Holy See is always ready to bring enemies together for talks for peace. And he has also spoken with President Zelensky, who has said he welcomes the Holy See's offer to try and mediate in this war, to try and help bring about a ceasefire. Now, of course, the main challenge for the Vatican has been that it's been hard for the Holy See to engage with Russia, and the Kremlin. It hasn't been clear that they've had a very high level of dialogue with the authorities in Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church. But a Russian official telling me that they will consider the Vatican's offer. They've been considering it as it's been on the table for some time, but it, of course, depends on the details and the officials saying goodwill from the Ukrainian side. But clearly, the Vatican, Pope Leo, seeking to try and offer what they can to try and bring about peace and an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. Christopher Lamb, CNN, Rome.